Do you remember in 2009 when you played Modern Warfare 2 Search and Destroy and got absolutely destroyed by a 10 years old named Duncan living in his mother's basement yelling at you racial slurs for sucking in the game? Yes, I remember. But did you ever think to yourself, what am I even playing? What is Search and Destroy? Well, today we are going to explore the beautiful history of one of FPS's most important features, game modes. Strip away the graphics, the sound design, the licensed weapons, the battle passes, and the lore. What you are left with in any multiplayer shooter is a set of rules. Rules about what you're trying to do, how long you have to do it, what counts as winning, and what happens when you die. These rules, which most players accept unthinkingly, like the rules of football or chess, are not obvious or inevitable. Someone had to design them. Someone had to decide that dying should mean waiting, or that dying should mean watching, or that dying, yes, there's a lot of dying here, should cost you money. I mean, not real money, thank God. Someone had to decide that the goal should be a number on a scoreboard, or a flag in a base, or a bomb at a site. You see what I was doing here? The history of FPS multiplayer game modes is the history of those decisions. Who made them, the problem they were solving, and why the results proved so durable that the competitive FPS landscape of 2026 is still built almost entirely on modes invented in roughly a 10-year window between 1993 to 2003. Understanding why these modes work is not an academic exercise. It is the foundation of understanding why competitive shooters feel the way they feel, why certain moments carry weight and others simply doesn't, and why the best multiplayer experiences in gaming history are defined less by the technology than by the elegance of their rules. So the first ever actual game mode for multiplayer shooters was deathmatch. Yes, deathmatch, or as anybody knows it today, as free-for-all. The first tool ever designed for online multiplayer shooting was, of course, shooting. AKA, you need to kill more players than anybody else. I know it sounds very psychotic, but let me explain. This is the entirety of deathmatch, introduced in Doom in 1993. No teams, no actual objectives, no role assignments, just a bunch of players, a bunch of weapons scattered around the map, and a single scoreboard measuring kills. The design was not the product of extended deliberation. Actually, ID Software built it because it was the natural application of network play or multiplayer to a game already which was about shooting things, more specifically, demons. The design philosophy was accidental. Deathmatch requires no introduction. You just pretend you like to kill and that's it. However, this is very important. What Deathmatch established more than anything was the principle that the flow for a playable multiplayer mode should be described in a single comprehensible sentence. You simply just needed to kill. And the simplicity of it was its strength. Yet, in 1996, Quake, yes, the legendary Quake, actually elevated the genre and added the holy grail of game modes, Team Deathmatch. I'm sure you can go to any 10 years old today who loves Fortnite or whatever Gen Alpha is playing, doesn't matter. You ask them, hey kid, do you know what Team Deathmatch is? They say to you, hell yeah, of course I know. So, similar to Deathmatch, it's very similar to each other, but the key difference is that players split into two sides with a shared kill counter. Still, the strategic depth was minimal. You still needed to kill things, but the social dimension changed dramatically. Losing as a team felt different from losing individually. The shared scoreboard created accountability. Team Deathmatch transformed Deathmatch from a competition into a team sport. Think of it like the NFL, but way more violent, and in doing so, Quake created the structural template that almost every multiplayer mode used since. TDM, stands for Team Deathmatch of course, is still 30 years later the most played mode in virtually every shooter that includes it. The reason is not that it is the most interesting mode, it's actually pretty simple and boring. It is almost certainly not, but that it is the most accessible. It demands nothing from the player's competence at the game's core mechanic, aka the shooting, movement, map knowledge, etc. That accessibility has a ceiling on a competitive depth, which is precisely why every other mode on this list was invented. Remember Capture the Flag, that one game mode in elementary school where the sweatiest kid will always win? Well, the breakthrough moment in multiplayer modes design was the realization that killing did not have to be the only goal. It could be the means to a different goal, one that required not just individual skill, but spatial thinking, wall coordination, and a strategic sacrifice. Capture the Flag, which appeared as a Quake mode in 1996. Damn, I never realized how influential Quake was. It was the first expression of this idea. The rules were simple: steal the enemy flag from their base and bring it to yours, while yours needs to still be present at your base. Simple enough to explain in one sentence. But the implications of that rule created a mode with structural depth that pure deathmatch could never approach. The key design insight of Capture the Flag is that it creates roles without mandating them. There is no rule that says that one player must defend the base, or while the other must carry the flag. These roles emerge naturally, with players' agency, from the geometry of the situation, from the fact that the flag needs to travel across a dangerous map, or the fact that your own flag can be stolen while you're still attacking, creating asymmetrical gameplay. This was a philosophical revolution disguised in a simple rule change. In deathmatch, every player is interchangeable. Simply, the best individual player win. In Capture the Flag, a player who never kills anyone but captures 3 flags has contributed more to the victory than the top fragger. The mode introduced the concept of contribution is distinctly from combat performance, and that concept will define every objective-based mode that follows. The flag also introduced a physical object into the multiplayer space, something that existed on the map, could be possessed, and could be dropped. The flag carrier became a high-value target. The drop flag became a focal point. The base became a place worth defending. Capture the Flag created geography, areas of the map that had specific strategic meanings. 1990's Unreal Tournament Domination looks on the surface like a modest variation on territory control. 3 points on the map. Hold more than the enemy to score continuously. But the specific choice to use 3 control points rather than 2 or 4 is one of the most consequential decisions in multiplayer game design. It was almost certainly not made with full awareness of its implications. 2 control points produce a tug of war, where one team holds one and the other holds the other, and the match reduces to whoever wins the single contested middle ground. The mode collapses into binary warfare. 4 or more points fragmented the map to the point where coordination becomes impossible, and the mode loses coherence since there are too many variables for any team to manage simultaneously. However, the 3-point structure creates something specific and remarkable, a situation where holding 2 or 3 puts you ahead, which means any team that holds 2 must decide whether to either to defend both points aggressively or push to the third one, while the team holding the remaining 1 point must decide whether to challenge on enemy point or to reinforce their own. The mathematics of the situation produces genuine strategic decisions, without requiring players to perform complex calculations. The central point, aka most prominent one, sits in the most contested location of the map, and it becomes the defining battleground of every domination match. It is always the most dangerous point to hold, and the most important one to contest. Teams that control the center simply control the tempo. This dynamic is so effective that it has been reproduced in nearly every objective-based FPS mode. For example, Call of Duty's Domination uses 3 flags labeled A, B, and C, with B always serving as a central meat grinder. Halo's variant mirrors the same structure, but with its own spin. King of the Hill mode distills it to its own logical extreme by making the single central point the entire mode. Domination also established a different relationship with time than Deathmatch or Capture the Flag or TDM. In TDM, you score when you kill. In Capture the Flag, you score when you complete the full capture. In Domination, however, you score continuously if you hold the points, which means the passage of time itself becomes a resource. A team with a solid 2-point lead is banking score every second, which means the losing team must take risks to break the hold before the deficit becomes insufferable. This creates urgency that is self-generating. The mode gets tighter as it goes on. not because of any mechanical timer, but because the mathematics of continuous scoring demands increasingly desperate action from the training team. Every mode discussed so far treats death as a temporary inconvenience. You die, you wait a few seconds, you respawn. The emotional weight of any individual engagement is low because the consequence of losing is minimal. You can take risks because failure is recoverable. This design assumption was so universal in 1999 that it was not even recognized as an assumption. It was simply how multiplayer worked. Counter-Strike's bomb diffusion mode, which Call of Duty would later popularize under the name Search and Destroy, demolished this assumption. If you die, you are done for until the next round.
If he dies, he dies.
This single rule change is arguably the most consequential design decision in the history of FPS multiplayer modes. Everything that makes Search and Destroy what it is today flows directly from it. When death removes you from playing, the calculus of every decision changes completely. The weight of every moment is calibrated by its irreversibility. The second order effect of no response is that information becomes a primary currency of the mode. In Team Deathmatch or Domination, knowing where the enemy is indeed helps you, but not knowing is only a moderate disadvantage you can afford. In Search and Destroy, however, that probe costs you the round. Information must be gathered carefully through sound of, for example, footsteps of your enemy holding a specific position. This is why Search and Destroy is the mode that builds competitive FPS esports. The tactical depth it generates, the coordination required to execute multiplayer strategies on maps with multiple visible paths, creates an environment where the gap between a good player and a great one is visible, consistent, and captivating to watch. Now we're getting to the juicy part. We're talking about my favorite franchise and my favorite game mode of all time, Conquest. Battlefield 1942's Conquest mode represents a different kind of design problem than any of the modes we talked about. Let's say Counter-Strike was solving the problem of tension. How do you make individual moments feel weighty? However, Conquest was solving a problem of scale. How do you give 64 players something meaningful to do simultaneously on a map large enough to contain tanks, aircrafts, and naval warfare? The answer was a control point system with a time-based scoring mechanic called ticket bleed. Multiple flags are scattered across the map. Each team holds a bank of reinforcement tickets. Holding more flags causes the enemy's tickets to drain over time. Depth, or kills, also cost tickets. The team that runs out of tickets loses. What makes Conquest structurally distinct from Domination, which it superficially resembles, is the relationship between territory, time, and resources. In Domination, holding capture areas scores you points toward a target. In Conquest, however, holding points drains the enemy finite resources while your kills add potential pressure. The match is not decided by reaching a score threshold, but by exhausting the opponent's capacity to sustain the fight. This creates a fundamentally different tempo. Conquest matches are sustained campaigns rather than discrete skirmishes, measured in minutes rather than seconds per objective. The practical consequence is that Conquest can support a scale of player activity that no other mode can. With 64 players on a map and 8 or 10 flags spread across it, different groups of players will be fighting completely different battles simultaneously. Conquest also introduced the concept of the front line into multiplayer design, an area of the map where two teams are in active contact, which shifts depending on which flags are contested. The front line is not drawn anywhere on the screen, but every player can feel it. It is where the fighting is happening. Managing the front lines gives Conquest a strategic depth that no small-scale mode can replicate. The ticket build mechanic is practically an elegant piece of game design. It means that a team holding more flags is passively winning their advantage, compounding over time without anyone having to do anything specific. But it also means that a team holding fewer flags is always in a recover position. Take back enough flags fast enough and the bleed reverses. Team fights until the ticket counter reaches 0, because there is always a mathematical possibility of a reversal, or in a more simple language, there's always a chance a team can Uno reverse each other. That hope, sustained by the mode's own mechanics, is what makes Conquest such a unique and dynamic mode, which is also my favorite game mode of all time. Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, Domination, Search and Destroy, and Conquest are not some antique curiosities kept alive by nostalgia. They are the active, competitive backbone of the world's most played online games, the modes you queue for today in Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Battlefield, etc. 30 years of iteration, investment, and design talent have not produced a replacement for any of them. You may consider Battle Royale, but that's for a different video. I think the reason for that is because they have such a defined set of rules which can be catered for such a diverse set of players, and because of that, the replayability value is infinite. And that's, my friends, the history of FPS modes. If you like my video, please subscribe. Comment below what's your favorite game mode. This is Lubash, signing off.